right, class, let's go ahead and get into the syllabus just briefly. So this isn't going to be a particularly difficult video or anything to get through. The basic idea here is to go to the course website, which you're probably on if you're watching this video, and navigate to the content section, and then within the administrative and organizational chunk of content or folder, there's also the Syllabus for Park and Wildland Management Online folder that has eventually a link to this video and the syllabus itself. So our syllabus for this class is, like I mentioned in sort of the welcome video the other day, is pretty long, but that's only because we have a very sort of mostly thorough menu of different things that we can kind of customize to emphasize in this class throughout the time that we're here. And the whole idea here is that everybody's gonna be taking this class for a different reason. Some folks are graduate students, some folks are undergraduate students, some folks want to go into wildlife management, some folks are dead set on being conservation police officers and so forth. So the very basic idea here is simply just to take a look at this really long shopping list, 34 pages long, and pick 3 things that you are particularly interested in out of that. I'll collect those votes, and we'll have a spot for you on the course website to send over that information. I'll put a link to that as well. And I'll compile all of those and kind of look for the hot spots among people's data, and then really sort of enrich the course with respect to those particular topics. And so the idea is that we'll have hopefully a class that's better fitted to your needs and goals, and a lot smarter, instead of just working sort of mindlessly through from one end of the semester to the other, just this laundry list of stuff. It's a little bit more work for me, but that's what you're paying me for. So let's get this thing started. We open up the syllabus with my contact information, and that should be pretty straightforward. Email, a couple of different cell phone numbers, Zoom video conferencing link, and between those you should be able to catch me at any point. I'm an old, decrepit man, so I'm going to probably not see your text messages after 10 p.m. and probably not typically going to answer them after about 7 p.m. each day. But it's no disrespect to you. I'm old and I need naps is basically what that boils down to. So at any point in the semester, if you have a question, don't hesitate a second to send that question off. It's much better to be waiting on an answer from me than it is to be kind of confused and feeling solo in an online class. So please send me a message whenever you have a question. Unless it's some kind of a personal question, like something that needs to remain confidential between you as the student and me as your instructor, I will probably reflect that question back out to the rest of the class with the answer, so that anybody else, and then usually there are at least a couple of people wondering whatever question you have, because, you are sane and people are generally thinking along the same lines that you are. So, again, if you have a question and it's not confidential, I'll post the answer publicly in the frequently asked questions section of the site and sort of build up a library of those as we go. I'll mention it in our daily Zoom debrief meetings, if that's a useful or appropriate spot to address that question, and so forth. I'll also try to answer the question to you back the way that you contacted me. So in text message or email or phone call or Zoom meeting or whatever. We'll go over the answer, kind of one-on-one there. And then I'll send that out to everybody else as well, because, you guys are asking good questions very typically. In a brick and mortar class session, I would have regular office hours twice a week for 3 hours at a stretch. But since we're all quarantined and since it's the summer, just contact me anytime during the week. You're also welcome to contact me over the weekend, but I'm not always by my phone then. So we'll have to exercise some patience there. But the only other caveat with that is, in text messages, I don't know what your cell phone number is typically before you take this class. And it helps me to answer your question more effectively if I know who I'm talking to, especially when I'm teaching multiple classes at the same time. So just send me your name. Hey, it's Sarah in 420, and I have this question about the syllabus. It was not real clear the way that you explained it. What did you actually mean by X, Y, and Z? And then we'll answer that. I'll post the answer on the website as well. Okay, so the purpose of this class is to really get into a whole bunch of research and a whole bunch of sort of practical day-to-day on the ground, boots on the ground kind of wisdom that have been developed for park and wildland management over the course of about the last 105 years. So the U.S. National Park Service was created in 1916, about 40 years after the first U.S. National Park was created. Ready, fire, aim. And the basic sense of it is it's complex, it's difficult. Some of the most difficult problems of land management happen in parks because we are held to a very, very high standard to be park rangers or planners or superintendents, conservation police, the whole kit and caboodle of different career titles or labels. So we're going to condense a bunch of those bits of knowledge and research. We'll kind of season that with some legislation that's happened, and mainly we're going to take a kind of a problem-based approach where there's this problem at this national park for these reasons. We could do a whole variety of things to address the situation, to mitigate it, that is, make it a little bit lighter or easier. What would we do given this context? And that will take us kind of right through the semester. And in order to do that, we need to provide high-quality recreation opportunities and experiences for the visitors in those situations, like the yous and the me's with our families and our friends and our loved ones visiting these parks. But also we need to make sure that the natural, historical, and cultural resources, so post-history and prehistory, like invention of writing before and after that moment, all of those resources. That's tough. That is very tough to do, like we explained just shortly in the initial welcome message to everybody. So this course examines the fundamentals regarding history, research, and practices of modern recreation management. So this is a form of forest ecology called human ecology and specifically recreation ecology. So on any given national park or state park staff, we're going to have planners, we're going to have biologists, ecologists, hydrologists, geologists, archaeologists, lots of different ologists, as they're called. And that means we need to take sort of techniques and wisdom from all of those different disciplines and harness them together so that we actually get this thing moving in a good direction. So we need history, we need research and practices of modern recreation management, all sort of gridded through the idea of what laws do we have to follow? What regulations and policy do we have to follow? We'll talk about the difference between laws and regulation and policy. And the Code of Federal Regulations, specifically 36, pretty cool stuff. We'll place special emphasis on the U.S. National Park System because it is an eminent organization. They are top shelf in the world for a lot of this, for a lot of good reasons. And that's pretty exciting that we have that sort of in our backyard. But of course, we can't forget the U.S. Forest Service. They deal with almost as many visitors as the U.S. National Park System does. So does the Army Corps of Engineers. So do the Bureau of Land Management and other federal management organizations. If you're not real sure what the difference is between the Park Service and the Forest Service and how the National Wilderness Preservation System kind of fits in with those, then you probably want to take a look at the Introduction to Forest Recreation Management course content that I'll post here kind of at the beginning of the content section after this administrative section that we're in right now, as a way to review or get up to speed. So pretty much every time I've ever taught this course, we have a bunch of students who are taking it from outside of the forestry department and maybe don't necessarily have the kind of the grounding and the context of what we're going to be talking about. So if that is you, then by all means, take a really pretty quick tour through that introductory stuff kind of over this first week of class, maybe the first couple of weeks of class. That'll take you through a bunch of the vocabulary, the history, explain differences like what makes something a national park versus a wilderness area. Aren't there some wilderness areas in national parks? Like, how does all that work? That review info is, I think, pretty light and quick and easy, but if that's something that's helpful for you, I'm very happy to provide it. So I'll go ahead and upload that as well. and that is optional. So you don't have to go through that review stuff if you don't want to, especially if you've taken Forestry 220 Intro to Forest Recreation with me. Maybe you get some benefit from spaced repetition, as that learning technique is called, but maybe it's just like extra time spent on stuff you've already learned. So if that is helpful for you, go for it. If not, skip right on ahead. Our objectives for this class are to study the characteristics, attitudes, motivations, and behaviors of outdoor recreation users and trends in outdoor recreation use. So this is a way of saying we're going to get inside the mind of a visitor and understand why visitors do the things that they do, or the things that we do. And this is really important because, again, this is a human ecology class. We can't consider a forest watershed in isolation because that doesn't exist anymore on the face of the earth. Even in the bottom of Challenger Deep in the Marianas Trench in the Pacific, we find evidence of human activity, litter. At the top of the tallest mountain in the world, we find lots of evidence of human activity, litter, frozen poop called coprolites. There are a bunch of dead bodies used as way markers on the way up Mount Everest. We cannot consider natural ecosystems without the presence of humans. So one chunk of our course, a pretty big chunk, is behavioral psychology and sociology and so on and so forth. So getting into the mind of sort of a hypothetical individual visitor and then extrapolating that out to the hundreds of millions of recreation visits that happen even just in the U.S. National Park system, let alone the forests and the wildlife refuges and so forth. So this is pretty cool. If you've ever spent time wondering, why did I just do that thing that I did? This might actually be a bit of an introduction to why that is. And then, of course, with that, we want to extrapolate forward kind of in time, and that will give us some trends and some good directions to kind of aim park and wildland management, because we don't want to fall into the trap of getting really good at managing recreation as it was 15 years ago, because that's not how it is now. It's definitely not how it's going to be 15 years from now or 30 years from now at the far end of your career. So we want to understand kind of what's the momentum of things, what's the direction of how people are using places, why people are using national parks, what benefits do they get, what costs do they incur, and so forth. Then we want to also take a look at the physical resources side of things. So that's going to involve basically a layer cake or a stack of different kinds of resources, and we'll take you through those kind of in order from bottom to top. That is bedrock and landscape and topography, kind of the physical shape of the bedrock of the earth, like in the form of mountains and valleys, and what does that mean for us? On up through soil, which is generated from bedrock, and then up to water, vegetation, and wildlife as profoundly interacting and interwoven, interpenetrating systems, and then layered on top of that, human cultural and archaeological and experiential resources. We'll talk about what those are. And then human infrastructure, things like trails and campsites and vista points and the visitor centers that we plunk down on mountain summits and that sort of thing. And then above that, of course, airshed resources like air quality and soundscape and light pollution and how that scatters through the air. Also stuff like vistas and landscapes. So we have landscapes on a physical level at sort of, is there a mountain blocking this view up ahead? Maybe the mountain range itself is the view. But then there's also the landscape and how air resources sort of contribute to that. Is there a bunch of haze? Is there a bunch of particulate smog that we got to look through, like at Great Smoky Mountains National Park? And you see this brown stripe across the bottom of the atmosphere when you're up on a mountain. What does that mean for us in forest rec management and the health of the forest and the health of people as well? And then up above that, we have nighttime sky resources. So it's maybe a fundamental chunk of the human experience to be able to see stars in their billions and to see the Milky Way in all of its beautiful color, as well as the fact that there's a Milky Way and it's more than just milky, there's a bunch of colors in it. And shooting stars and satellites and the International Space Station and so on and so forth. So we'll get into all of those resources, and again, we'll kind of wrestle with those in order, and we'll talk about some of the dynamics and interactions that those have with visitors, and how we can prevent visitors from just destroying any of those, but also how park rangers and other park-attached recreation-attached professionals kind of put this stuff together with adjacent landowners, with other government agencies, with other countries, and so forth, and how we gotta kind of manage these huge and porous and ever-changing living areas. This is pretty cool stuff. I get excited about it. Maybe you don't, but I hope that you can. This is amazing. We live on just the most incredible planet, and this is a really cool way to get to know it. So, next we'll explore in detail some effective management frameworks. So some ways of just kind of organizing what could we possibly do in this crazy, swirling, ever-changing, and partially damaged milieu that we live in. Those organizations, those structures are called management frameworks. And what are the principles and practices that guided their creation and development and improvements over time? But how can we use those really practically on a day-to-day basis to meaningfully and effectively and affordably and sustainably over a long period of time? How can we protect visitor experiences? How can we protect those resources, those endangered species that threaten water quality, and so on and so forth, for all of us? Parks are the upper watershed. We get our drinking water typically from places that begin as parks, and then the rivers flow out of them into our cities and so forth. So let's protect that effectively. We want to introduce a variety of current park and wildland management issues and settings, so problems, controversies. We'll pull both academic articles, which are kind of stuffy and boring, but they're the underpinning of why we do certain things the way we do them based on statistics and field research and stuff like that. And then we'll also pull a whole bunch of popular articles right out of the press to help us understand, okay, so what is this particular dynamic that we're talking about on a given day? What does this look like from the visitor's perspective? What happened when the guy whipped off his shirt in a drunken rage and charged the bison? Or when the parent put a bunch of honey on their kid's hand and pushed the kid towards the bear so they could get a cool photo op and the kid lost his hand, and so forth. So they're not all gory stories like that, but those particularly gory stories, if it bleeds, it leads in the popular press, as the saying goes, and we can use that in a very instructive way to learn from that fail and avoid it next time. And then we'll finally wrestle with the roles that various publics play. There are different ways of knowing, different ways of living in the American experience. It's not all sort of old, boring white guys like me, thank goodness. What about the First Nations and the Native Americans that live in and around protected areas that we use for recreation? Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, there's still traditional caribou hunting there for lots of peoples, not just one, that live almost exclusively on a diet of caribou. And how do they do that? How can we be park rangers in that context, as well as park rangers in the context of a place like Gateway Arch in St. Louis? Very, very different scene, different publics, and how they get to and how they need to and how we need them to contribute to this management process. We can't do this in a vacuum without them. All right, moving on to required course materials. We have just one, and that is the third edition of Robert Emmett Manning's excellent Studies in Outdoor Recreation. This is kind of the Bible for being a park ranger or a park planner or a superintendent someday, or a forester who's going to be dealing with people in any capacity. It's a huge book. It's super dense. There are a couple of thousand studies kind of organized and cited and explained a little bit in this book. So where we have assigned chapters out of this book, you want to give yourself whatever time and space and posture and energy and proper diet and exercise that will help you get through those chapters. This is a monster of a book, but it is the right book. It is incredible. I'll post the chapters of the book on our course website, chapter by chapter, as PDFs, so that you can get started on those right away while you're waiting for your copy of the book to arrive. When the class is being taught brick and mortar and we have a bunch of folks, I don't particularly mind if people share the book around. You don't have to have your own copy of it as long as you have access to it, or to check out the university library's copies of the textbook. But we don't want to get behind in this class because you're waiting on the book to arrive from Amazon. It came out in 2011, so by all means get a used copy even if it's marked up or whatever. I chopped mine up and sent it through the book scanner, and it is in little pieces now, but the physical format of the book matters less than your access to it. So however you need to get access to our textbook, please do so. And that's a good assignment for today, day one. So if you are a graduate student, we'll probably have a couple extra reading materials for you, mostly in the form of journal articles and workups of research studies and their gray literature equivalent called management reports, where it's basically what the research article says, but it's the book-length report out to the agency that sponsored the study. So there have been many, many hundreds of those, and they are incredibly valuable if you know where to look for the good stuff in them. So I'll help you with that. If you're taking this course for graduate credit, and that is welcome and awesome, by all means contact me. I've already had a conversation with two of the grad students taking this class this semester. How can I make this class more valuable to you as a graduate student relative to your specific thesis or project or externship or whatever your jam is? Please contact me individually by email, phone. Again, you've got all of my contact information at the head of this document. Let's customize this class to make sure that it's not just another class as make work. We just want to make sure that anything you produce for this class can be copy-pasted one-to-one into your thesis or your project or what have you. Does that make sense? All right, so if you're a graduate student, reach out to me solo, and I mentioned this in our email before the class began as well. Grading system is fairly straightforward. Every 10% is another letter grade, down from 100%, and I've got a very brief rubric there. So A level is mastery of material and applications, critical thinking, and preparedness. A lot of this comes down to participation, showing up, being present in the discussions, and if you are spending your irrecoverable life and time typing an answer to a difficult question in this class, put the thought into it, put the work into it. This is your shot to develop your mind and your understanding, and then the moment is gone forever, right? So participate, show up, be thoughtful, and don't ever feel like you have to pad out an answer to me to make it arbitrarily longer or more impressive. Say what you need to say and then stop. Move on. We got a lot of other stuff to do. But put your thought into it so that what you are saying is valuable, that it's a meaningful expansion to the conversation. I get this next question a lot. If you are away for a couple of days, and this is especially relevant here during an online section of the class where people are going to be working or going on vacation trips during the summer, that sort of thing. If you ever miss part of class, the online version of this is taught asynchronously. You can move through things at your own pace as I'm able to post them. But never ask, did I miss anything important? The answer is categorically, emphatically, and irrevocably yes. We don't do anything that's unimportant in this class with respect to recreation management. Your time is very, very precious and expensive, and we don't want to waste that. So just assume that if you are away from this class for a couple of days, the class doesn't stop, right? And we are moving right along. So get back, jump back in, and continue adding value to your learning experience. I'm unable to reteach entire class sessions for you individually. It just doesn't scale, so we can't really do that. What you would do in that case, if you are sort of separated from the class for a little bit for valid reasons like a vacation, is jump back in, pick up where you left off, and keep moving forward. You will do best if you don't get behind. So if you know that you have a trip coming up, by all means, work a couple of days ahead. That's never a problem. Okay, let's talk a sec about field trips, and I'll break this out hopefully in one or a couple of additional recordings as well, so it's easier to find this section of it. But field trips are a necessary and key piece of this class. Typically we go to national parks like Ozark Scenic Riverways or Mammoth Cave or wherever, and we go through a bunch of stuff as a class. We practice some field techniques, we talk with park rangers and so forth and so on. It's great. But with an online section of the class, we can't do that. And as this is being recorded in 2020, we've got this whole sort of self-quarantine thing, which is still getting lifted, and individual parks are still reopening and so forth. It's just not safe for us to meet up for a class trip, and not everybody would be able to do that logistically. So since we have students all over the country and a few all over the world, we want to make sure that you can take some kind of an impromptu field trip to a neighborhood park, or if you are a grad student and you're doing field work this semester, very cool, by the way, consider the jungle or forest near you as a good target for a field trip, as long as that's a safe place to go. And we will have a bunch of field skills throughout the semester. Knot tying, search and rescue, trail and campsite, measurement, data collection, analysis, design, layout, in no particular order, and so on and so forth. And those mini field trips to your community park or to Shawnee National Forest near Carbondale or wherever you decide to go, that's your shot to practice those things pretty much exactly as they're actually done at national parks and forests. And then we can translate that to other places like state parks and local community green spaces like Green Earth's green spaces here in Carbondale and their trail networks. So these field trips are very, very important. Nobody's going to get much out of this class if it breaks down to just watching a bunch of videos of me talking at a camera. Instead, if you are practicing things with the muscle memory of your hands and the kinesthetic learning of your body and posture and being immersed in the work environment that you would have as a park ranger, that's when the magic happens. That's when you're going to be learning really, really well, really quickly, and retaining things, keeping that knowledge, instead of just having it wash over you from a video and sitting passively watching that video. So typically I'll try to post a YouTube link that is streaming, but I'll also try to post the equivalent video as a file that you can download and just load onto your phone or whatever, so that you can take it to that park or protected area to practice that skill. And you don't have to destroy your phone's battery by streaming video long distance over the air, but you can also save on your data allowance and your mobile phone contract that way. Okay, what you're going to need for those field trips are the following. A field notebook. I recommend those bright yellow, Write in the Rain notebooks for the obvious reason. And bring a pencil or 2 or 3 with that, maybe a pocket knife to sharpen your pencil in the field. Ink runs in the rain, Sharpies if you get water in the inorganic or the organic solvent ink felt tip. The water displaces that ink and the Sharpie stops writing. You want to have closed-toed shoes, so sandals are great. They're comfortable Chacos, I love them too. Crocs, if that's your life way, then no judgment, yay. But this is kind of a professional and work-oriented class, so we want closed-toed shoes, maybe even boots, like hiking boots or steel-toed boots, whatever you've got available. Long work pants, keep those ticks off and keep the sun off you. And long sleeve for the same reason. And some kind of a plan for turkey mites or ticks in that nymph stage, where sometimes around here they're called seed ticks, where you might have a cluster of a couple of hundred of them on the underside of a leaf. When you brush by the leaf, now you got a couple of hundred ticks on you. Tick-borne illnesses, as we'll talk about later this semester, are expanding in range with thanks and gratitude to global climate forcing and destabilization, and that's bad. That means more illnesses are starting to sort of wash across us in the Midwest here. And once they arrive, they stay. So I also want you to take a moment to look up what are tick-borne illness symptoms. Sometimes things like Lyme disease can masquerade as other things and literally go untreated for years until it's not particularly treatable anymore. So I need you to be safe and professional in understanding the risks around you. So a second assignment for us in this syllabus section is to look up tick-borne illnesses and understand what our profession is going to be exposing us to. And it's okay. Like, we can prevent tick-borne illnesses with just a little bit of forethought. Long sleeves, long pants, something like permethrin or permanone. It's a contact nerve toxin for insects and arthropods. It really gets after their acetylcholine and they just fall off dead. Very handy stuff, but you would want to do your homework and understand that you never, ever, ever spray permanone on your skin. It goes on your clothing, and it's extremely water insoluble, so it stays on your clothing for up to a couple of dozen washes. Great stuff. I want you to understand the health risks and the trade-offs involved with stuff like picaridin versus DEET, which is industrial World War II era plasticizer agent. It makes plastics soft, like in the console of your car, for fake leather. But it also works really well as an insect repellent, like better than anything else. It just confuses their chemical sensors. But it's probably not real great for your DNA. Just throwing it out there. We also want you to know what poison ivy, poison oak, poison sumac, etc. urushiol-producing plants look like. Leaves with 3, let it be. Sawtooth edge. Understand it looks sometimes like a low vine, sometimes like a hairy climbing vine, sometimes like a delicious berry fruiting body. Please learn what urushiol producing plants look like, and that will serve you well. For those of you who are forestry majors taking this class, you've probably already taken Tree ID, you probably already understand what poison ivy looks like, but for those of you who haven't, now's your chance, and so forth. This class is generally really pretty light on quizzes and a final exam. Those are useful instructional tools, but they're more useful for a face-to-face and in-classroom experience. For those of us taking the class on more of a field or an online course format basis, these skill checks like the knots, the search and rescue grids, the trail construction, measurement, maintenance, that whole list, those work a lot better for quizzes than a traditional paper quiz. So that's where we're going to be focusing most of our assessment efforts in this class, okay? As we get a little bit closer, we will choose a final exam format. And at the end of the course curriculum list, which is super long on the syllabus, you'll find I've got 4 or 5 different exam formats that we've used in the past, and those are all valid options. So it can be a traditional paper exam, it could be something structured more like a game show. The point is to get some good information for the gradebook, but to do it in a way that's less intimidating and stressful and allows you to focus on the hard work that you've put in on learning and practicing and developing through this course. Okay? So I've got you on that. Laboratory assignments, like those field exercises. For an online version of this class, I'm good enough if you are able to send me a snapshot, a clearly legible snapshot of your field notebook. So by all means, give me photos of that, and you can send those in kind of whenever, sometimes through a course Dropbox if that's appropriate, or just a direct email to me at logan.park@siu.edu. We don't need to worry so much about typing a lot of stuff up, except for those online discussions for an online version of this class. Late assignments will be penalized. This is mostly boilerplate. Because this class is going to be self-paced, everybody's got a different work schedule this summer. I respect that, and I understand how that can run you pretty ragged over the course of these 8 weeks or so that we have together. So I'm not going to put a lot of hard deadlines on things throughout the semester, but by the end of the semester, that is a hard deadline. Your access to D2L just shuts off at the end of the course, I believe midnight on July 31st for this year in 2020. And that means, if the work has kind of piled up to that last week, it's not going to be great effort typically. It's kind of overwhelming in that case. So please, please, please pace yourself throughout the semester. Don't let things pile up towards the end. Again, if you have to go on vacation, or if you're going on a multi-day field trip for this class, we have students that do stuff like that, like a multi-day float trip on the Ozark National Scenic Riverways, not too far from here. Work ahead. Give yourself plenty of space and time to do this stuff. Everything works better, everything comes out better when you're not rushed, okay? And I understand that you are also busy with work and so forth. Pace yourself throughout the class. You will do well. Ethics do matter in this class. It's very rare that I ever have to drop the hammer on students for plagiarizing. Typically, that takes the shape of copy-pasting when somebody gets real behind from like Wikipedia, for example. But when that does happen, I really got to drop the hammer on that because that is profoundly unfair to everybody else and to you taking this class. So ethics do matter, and we do check through stuff like that. So please, please, please don't put both of us in the awkward situation of me having to bring the academic code to bear. This is very rarely a problem, and I love working with students who never make this a problem. So by all means, let's do that. Professionalism is a part of this class, so to the extent that we have any Zoom meetings with park rangers or other professionals in our field, we want to represent SIU well, represent yourself well, your personal brand, as millennials say, by being attentive, strong eye contact, communicating, following up, being clear about things. And this is less of a problem now, but avoiding things like, for example, partaking in smokeless tobacco products and spitting near the feet of guest speakers. That is less professional. So the alternative might be to not do that. And those talks with guests tend to be really, really valuable networking experiences for you to build up your professional network and sort of launch up out of SIU and get your career started. So professionalism, even though we're not in a professional space yet, it's never too early to start, okay? So you are responsible for your education. Bring excellence. Excelsior. Large-scale emergencies do happen, but since we're all quarantining in place, it's probably only going to be on an individual basis. So if we do have some sort of large-scale emergency, like during a Zoom meeting, for example, where we are sort of virtually together, keep your head on, and we will figure it out together. If you have any individualized learning or mobility needs for this class, that's okay. That's totally fine. I'm already working with the department on campus DSS that handles that for one student, and I'm pretty sure I've never gone a semester without doing that. And it's a real pleasure to do so, to make sure that this class is entirely accessible for anybody with an individualized learning need or individualized mobility need or just an unusual medication regime or something like that. That's okay. You have a first class ticket in this class as well, just like everybody else. So help me understand what your situation is if that's you, and definitely contact DSS, and you're probably familiar with this by the time of taking senior level classes or graduate classes, if that's you. So by all means do that, and that process is already underway, and that's exciting. So I can help you a lot with that. That unlocks a ton of different resources for you and me to get this class done well for you. So take a look here in a bit with the curriculum list, and if nothing on our 34-page list of stuff for this class is ringing the bell for you, that's okay. Be honest with yourself. If you're just really not excited about one single thing in 34 pages of really cool topics to me, then okay, drop the class. No love lost. But if there is anything that does really sort of ring your bell, seem like a useful tool for you professionally, based on your needs and goals and career desires, again, give me 3 of those. And we'll customize this class. We'll weight this class toward those individual interests, and especially where those overlap among multiple students. That's a way that we can make this much more valuable for all of us. Just a brief kind of tail end before we get into that list of content. I do need more than this one class, especially if it's online, to be able to recommend you with any degree of specificity. We're going to do everything we can this semester with this class being online to have me, to have you, to have our group of students, our little cohort, moving through together and actually understanding who each person is instead of just being like a name on a list or a name attached to a discussion post. We're all human beings, and we want to remember the human behind the keyboard and so forth. But in order for me to help you out with your career and write some of those all-important recommendation letters or provide like reference phone calls if it's federal employment, I do a lot of that. Sort of partway through our semester will be sort of the next federal hiring wave for spring stuff and for the very tail end of fall positions that they're trying to fill seasonally. It kind of shows in any of those phone calls or letters that I write if I'm not real familiar with you yet. If we had a couple of classes together, especially if we've had summer camp together, I probably know you pretty well, and I can go on for literally pages just glowing information about how cool you are and how great and what an asset you'd be to the Forest Service or Park Service or Morton Arboretum or wherever you want to work, St. Louis Zoo. And I'm happy to do that. I love doing that. I really, really get a lot of satisfaction out of helping you make that kind of scary transition from being a college student out into the wide world beyond. That's one of the things that gets me out of bed in the morning. But I need more than this class worth of interaction to do that with you. So be an individual, be a human. Contact me to ask career questions and so forth. So the stuff that we would kind of file under advising, we have course advisors. We also have professional advisors here in our program and in our college and all of that. And they do amazing stuff. We do amazing stuff. I'm really proud of that. But that kind of involves you taking a risk, coming out of your shell a little bit and pinging me by Zoom or FaceTime or Skype or whatever. And just having some of those conversations so that I know what your goals are and where you want to go with them, okay? So by all means, don't be a stranger. And I promise it won't be weird. I've had these conversations lots of times, and I'll help you through if you're feeling even kind of shy or introverted and it's like, oh man, I really don't want to do this, but I know I'm supposed to do this. Okay, don't worry, I get it. I'm an introvert too. I'll get you through, no problem. Okay, so let's just run briefly, 42 minutes into this video, through the content areas for this class. And first is that syllabus. And second, we'll do a class roster, gonna get to know everybody, exercise, or a couple of those. And then we're not really gonna worry about a pretest for this class. We'll collect a bunch of that information kind of passively through discussion posts and so forth. And that will work just fine. And pretests sound kind of scary, so we'll reformat that a little bit. In terms of actual content, we'll start that actually with forest recreation management field skills. So knots, bends, hitches, lashings, a lot of stuff that you probably didn't think about tying your shoes this morning, but there is a lot of reasons of physics and knot topology and so forth that you tied your shoes the way that you did. And in forestry, we rely a lot on knots and lines, ropes, that sort of thing for our safety equipment and for life-saving for things like high-angle rescue, search and rescue, that sort of thing. So you need to start getting comfortable with the idea of picking up a couple of knots. So you're going to want some kind of a rope or line at home. It can be as small as a shoelace or even dental floss if you're a real masochist, or something like this sort of cheap poly cotton core line. It's like $5 at a hardware store, or you can get actual climbing rope if you are into actual climbing and tree work and that sort of thing. And you might even know some of these knots already in that case. So that will be one thing that we definitely do. Backpacking and camping skills. Let's see what the class's interest is in those. So that's how to be on a trip, as well as how to be a forester or park ranger, providing those trips with quality and ecological sustainability in mind. Visitor contacts for interpretive rangers, for law enforcement rangers, forest protection officers, conservation police. How do you go about interacting with the public? Well, there's a lot of technique and training and so forth that goes into that. And so we'll kind of get that topic area started, and we'll leave some bits of that for things like law enforcement academy. So federal park rangers are federal enforcement agents, and they go to, in some cases, the same academy as FBI, for example. So we're not going to take you through that whole course. That's a whole other ball of wax, but we'll at least kind of get some of that conversation started. Land navigation, map and compass. These days we like to use a lot of GPSs, but batteries fail. Cell phones and tablets get dunked in creeks when we're trying to cross those, and so we want to be able to use paper and electronic navigation and orientation tools with effectiveness and safety and efficiency. So we also want to talk a little bit about forest recreation infrastructure, like trails and campsites, from design and sort of the inception phase all the way through maintenance and rehabilitation, which is shutting down a trail or campsite and renaturalizing it. How do we do restoration ecology to remove the negative ecological effects of a trail or campsite and kind of bring that spot or that length back into ecological function? Next, search and rescue and leave no trace. Leave no trace being an ethic that guides and informs and shapes and steers a bunch of these other skills that we've previously listed. All right, so the next section of this is all about the review. So we'll spend just a brief moment on that. This is mostly definitions and terms, and then a real quick primer into public land management agencies like the U.S. National Park Service, and then into history. How did we get to where we are? How did preservation split from conservation, but kind of in parallel with that? And also, in that review section, we've got a careers in forest recreation management as well as a unit. So what are some different job titles? Maybe some that you're like profoundly familiar with already, and others maybe that you hadn't really thought about as being attached to forest recreation management. There's a bunch, and we just want to make sure everybody's aware of the whole landscape as far as your different options. And after that, we've got kind of a brief fun section on forest recreation technologies. So what are the crazy gadgets and materials and information technologies that people use for forest and outdoor recreation? Things like combination bass boats, hovercrafts, and airplanes. That's pretty metal. And things like bulletproof aramid fibers. How does that work with climbing? What are the ecological effects of being able to jump in a wingsuit and parachute off of a cliff and fly over a forest ecosystem? What does that do to wildlife? We'll talk about what some of those technologies are. And then just a brief thing about marketing in forest recreation to help us understand what companies and corporations want us to think and feel about forest recreation so that they can make some money and create value for shareholders. Well, we might be caught in that crossfire as forest recreationists and park rangers and so forth. So we just talked through that briefly in that review section. So all of that stuff, that set of terms and definitions and history and the career section and the trends and technologies and the marketing, that's all Forestry 220 Intro to Forest Recreation. Again, that is an optional introduction or refresher that you can do. For Forestry 420, if you're already comfortable with that stuff, then we'll kind of jump right into those forestry field skills and also the forest recreation resources stack from bedrock up to nighttime sky and the cosmos beyond, to infinity and beyond, as the philosopher once said. So, soil, water, vegetation, wildlife, human resources, infrastructure, airshed, night sky, and then we've got a section of combinations of those. So air plus infrastructure, night sky. So infrastructure being light pollution, and then air quality factors that scatter that light pollution sideways into our eyes instead of releasing it up into the sky. Soundscape plus wildlife plus visitors. Winter at Yellowstone Valley case study with a bunch of snow machines and bison starving to death because they're freaked out about snow machines, and so forth. And kind of at the very tail end of that stack of resources, we kind of wrap all of those different layers of that stack together and talk about climate forcing and destabilization. So there's a lot of very compelling research that suggests around the 2040 to 2060 window, so kind of right in the middle of your careers, climate destabilization is really going to start coming to a head. Like this year we have an extra hot storm and hurricane season forecasted. Typically we have about a dozen named tropical storms and hurricanes coming out of the South Atlantic or middle or low latitude Atlantic up north towards us. This year it's forecast to be anywhere from 15 to 18, so as much as a 50% increase. And if you think about how climate change kind of amplifies the energy that drives storms, that's a big deal. And if we're a forest manager, we need to be aware of stuff like that. And what are some of these climate dynamics that are happening? What are some of the effects on climate change or carbon sequestration, pulling carbon out of the air and lowering that greenhouse forcing effect through the forests that we maintain as park rangers and foresters and so forth? We'll wrestle with all of that for a bit. There's enough there to be not only its own class, but its own major. So that's just going to be a real small dip into the pool of climate science. And we'll talk about a whole bunch of evidence-based stuff for that. Once we've had a chance to talk about the physical resources and the experiential resources in that stack, then we want to move into getting into the mind of the visitor a little bit. So what are basic correlates or things that are associated with a certain kind of visitor in terms of age, sex and gender, socioeconomic status, Hispanic versus non-Hispanic, education level? Like, how do those things combine to help inform and shape and direct how somebody thinks about forest and outdoor rec? What are the cognitive processes? How do we think about forest and outdoor rec? Why do we do the stuff we do in terms of like motivation and trying to impress people, trying to notch beautiful experiences, trying to seek some solitude? Solitude is a very human-oriented resource, but an incredibly powerful and important one when you look at it, even its physiological effects on us, our well-being. So we'll talk about what some of those are. And then things like we'll extrapolate that thought process out into what are trip characteristics. So how many people do we go with? How long do we go? How much money do we spend? What activities do we do? How do we get there? Trip characteristics. That'll be some useful stuff. And then we'll talk about kind of some planning issues. How do you plan the operations for a park that's going to see tens of millions of visitors over the course of a decade? Or if it's a Chinese national park in some cases, up to 100 or 200 million visits per park per decade. That's insane. Okay, so and then we'll get into recreation management frameworks as a great way to sort of organize all this stuff into, okay, so now that we know all this stuff about the resources and the recreationists and the plans that we gotta have, what's like the day-to-day stuff? Like, what are we actually gonna do about all this? That's the recreation management framework part. Okay, so I'm up to kind of the teens and 20s on our syllabus list here. That'll be a great jumping off point to talk about risk management in forest records. What do we do about that rare visitor who not only does something just incredibly stupid, and I don't say that lightly because we generally want to respect our visitors and assume the best about them, but occasionally there's just a real numbskull. How do we manage the risk involved with them? How do we manage the risk of lightning strikes on mountainsides where, you know, it's hitting rock climbers at Teton and vaporizing their gear completely with a couple million volts and charge equalization across that, and then they fall a couple thousand feet to their deaths after they die of a heart attack. And we'll get into wilderness management. Now there's a separate wilderness management class, so this will be sort of just a context and jumping off point for that class in this class. But wilderness management is huge and important and tricky. And then we've got some controversial topics, cultural issues and differences, things like environmental justice, information programs, privatization of public lands. Can a president order that a national park be decommissioned and turned into mining land? Well, that's kind of up for debate lately for the first time. So that's awkward. Partnerships and corporate sponsorships. Do we want to accept money from Walmart to be Shawnee National Forest brought to you by Walmart Incorporated. Maybe, maybe not. There's some maybe good ways to do some of that and some pretty bad ways to do some of that. So, controversial topics. And then I've got them collected here, and there are many of them, a couple of dozen. Case studies and examples, like live examples from different parks. In truth, they're listed here, they're collected here for convenience, but really we're going to salt them all throughout the previous sections, like the management framework, where they apply. So Acadia National Park has a bunch of stuff going on, like Vista Resources. Acadia National Park is an island off the coast of Maine, looks out over the Atlantic. It's beautiful. It's got a 1,500-foot high mountain summit and a bunch of other peaks, and it is gorgeous. And so in our management framework on managing Vista Resources, we'll use Acadia National Park as an example there. But again, that's this list here towards the end of our curriculum list just collects several dozen of those. So currently we've got 80 case studies listed. We won't actually touch on all 80. Part of our selection of case studies is just based on who's interested in what, okay? So make sure to let me know 3 different things off of this curriculum list of 30 plus pages that you would like for us to make sure to tackle this semester. Same thing with the forest recreation management scenarios. We got a couple of dozen of those, and these take some of the situations from our case studies up above, St. Louis Zoo, Thebes, Illinois, White Mountains National Forest, Warren Dunes, etc., and takes that situation and puts it in a hypothetical park or another park or other protected area that we use for recreation to make sure that we understand sort of like the dynamics and the trade-offs and so forth, and it gives you a chance to shine as a future forest recreation manager or ranger or what have you, and can I just describe what you would do. So like those case studies, our management scenarios are going to be like thought exercises or lab exercises where you get to kind of describe how you would do this and why. And then we'll wrestle with some of the side effects. There are always side effects, and that's not a problem. Okay? And then to finish this off, we've got a couple of 5 different final exam formats. So throughout the semester, kind of think about those, think about which ones you might be comfortable with, ones you might be less comfortable with, and we will get after it, okay? We'll discuss and decide as a class what final exam format you would like to do. All right, so that's our syllabus. Again, we got a couple of assignments out of this, so make sure to head to D2L on the course website to begin accomplishing those. If you have any questions about the syllabus, I'll have a discussion link as well, and you can ask clarifying questions and I'll post responses. Thanks.